When I looked at them and I put it to a test to all the places in the history of our society that either led to a failure of the society or to ultimately evil, these were the four factors: power over behavior, binary thinking, us versus them, simplistic solutions to complex problems, and the control of information. When a person isn't given all the information, or we don't have all the information and we act as if we do, it leads to evil.
Insight and Awareness Spiritual Explorer. Soul intuitive, emotional and spiritual mentor and award-winning author, Lorraine Nilon.
Welcome, explorers. I'm your host, Lorraine Nilon, and today our guest is Evan Longan, a retired psychotherapist and professor who's now an author, and he's written a book called The Root of Evil, a postmodern exploration of the unintended consequences of civilization. Now, that's a big topic, Evan. So
It is.
yeah, so tell us why you wrote the book and then what it's actually about.
Well, the book has taken me a lifetime. I've actually been working on it for 25 years. My interest originally was looking at why some forms of psychotherapy fail.
Okay, yeah.
And my team and I came up with 4 areas that are very important in understanding psychotherapy failure. And one of the reasons I prefer being called Evan Longan is I like to create a commonality between myself and my client.
So just for our listeners, we just had a big debate because I was going to call Evan Dr. Evan Longan, and he said, no, I prefer Evan, so that we're on the same playing field, which is interesting because that's, I think, when you are working with people, they need to feel like there's an equal pegging there.
Yeah, well, for a long time, psychotherapists believed that they should be called doctor and it should be very formal. And there were rules that separated the client or patient from the therapist. And we found on our team that understanding really hindered success in psychotherapy, that actually people want to feel familiar and comfortable with their therapist, and they want to feel that there's an understanding on the part of the therapist of who they are, and not some robotic, distant individual. So we tried to cut down on the binary nature of psychotherapy. That was the first thing we noted in why psychotherapy in some cases failed. The second is power over behavior. So I give many examples in my book. Psychotherapists making the assumption that somebody is a patient because of something they may have done. For example, I had a young 7-year-old child who was sent to me after he knocked out all the windows in his school, after school. And they removed him from school and told him he couldn't return until he was evaluated. And when I spoke to the parent who was making this call to bring their child in, I said I wanted the whole family to come in so I could meet them all and understand what's going on. And they said, no, you can't do that. My child is a problem, and you should only see my child. I said, well, if that's what you want, I'll refer you to some other therapists. But if you're going to come into my practice, you all have to come, your husband, yourself, and your other child. And at first she said no. And I said, okay, go back to your physician who referred you to me and tell them that you don't want to see me. So then she decided, okay, she'll bring in the family. When they arrived the next day, they only came with the one child. And I asked them, where's the other family member? And they said, the sister had no problems and she wasn't going to be given problems by me. I said, well, that's really a shame because she could really be helpful in helping me understand what's going on in your family. So they all sat down in my office and I said to the child, why don't you come sit with me and be my assistant therapist? And the mother said, are you out of your mind? My son is crazy, and you're going to make him the assistant therapist? I said, well, humor me. Let me see what your son is all about and how he can help me. So every time I spoke to this child, the mother interrupted. Finally, after several minutes, maybe 15 or 20 minutes into the session, the father said, I can't take this any longer. My son came home from school and found his mother passed out on the floor drunk. He then went back to the school and knocked out the windows. It was a call for help. I said, well, thank you very much. He said, I was afraid to say that my wife is in charge in the family and we can't tell her that there's something wrong with her. Well, that was a perfect example of how we miss often the issues. Most of my colleagues, when they get a referral from the school, see the child alone. They don't bother to find out what else is going on and what may have made that child act out in that fashion. Yeah. So that's power over behavior on the part of the school, on the part of therapists, on the part of doctors. They don't want to hear the whole story.
Actually, and you find that in lots of different things, because even the other day someone said to me, oh, so you're disappointed something didn't work the way you wanted? And I went, no, I'm actually disappointed because they did a bodgy job, and now I've got to, it's not right, so I've got to work out how to fix it. Oh, so you're upset that it didn't go your way? And I was like, I'm upset because it's a bodgy job and I've got to go, I've got to go and fix it. Like the problem isn't my reaction. The problem is that a mistake's been made and someone's got to be accountable for it so that we can get the mistake fixed. And, but this person just concentrated on, oh, so you're having trouble with your emotions. And I think that's a bit of a summary of what we do with our emotions, instead of looking at the whole picture and a bit of the history of why that person feels that way and is acting out that way, and taking a holistic approach to that behavior. We're trying to just go, how do we fix it so nobody else has to confront themselves with their part in it, because nobody wants to take accountability for them.
I agree with you. Lorraine, you would have been a great member of our team.
Yes. I would have enjoyed it too, don't you worry.
Yeah, and that leads to the third problem, simplistic solutions to complex problems. That people are always finding a simple answer, and they don't want to hear there are multiple factors. There's lots of things at stake. We have to be more complex and listen more carefully to understand what the problem is, and then what the possibility of doing it in different ways.
Yeah. And even listening to ourselves, the way we frame things and then reframe things to make ourselves feel comfortable without actually sometimes taking in the importance of reality.
So you're a postmodern thinker.
Thank you.
That's how we in postmodern psychotherapy and in postmodern philosophy think that we're very complex beings. We have conversations within ourselves from very different and disparate points of view. We have to listen to various parts of ourselves, various parts of the story, and come to an understanding of what may be at the bottom of whatever's going on.
Yeah, and that's not always easy to find.
No, it's not.
It's not. And it's interesting because I work a lot with abuse victims, which can be narcissistic abuse or childhood sexual abuse. And the amount of times that they actually say, I was doing this behavior, but I didn't correlate it back to my history or the abuse that was going on. I just thought there was something wrong with me, or I just stayed. They didn't even go there. They just looked at it and went, I should be ashamed of myself constantly. And they didn't give themselves any space to really explore what's going on within themselves.
Absolutely. And Lorraine, we in postmodern thinking begin with being curious, of
Yes.
questioning, of looking for other areas that may have gone unnoticed. So
Yeah.
we're constantly looking to question people and listen to them. You know, when I grew up a long time ago in psychotherapy, and my first understanding of psychotherapy, I trained in psychoanalytic style psychotherapy, and I was always amazed that within an hour, the therapist knew not only what the problem was, but where it began in their life. And I would say to myself, really? Is that always the case? Well, psychotherapists didn't listen at that time to other possibilities. They were listening to their own theory. They were in
Yeah.
their own head. They were not in the possibility that their theory about these individuals was wrong. Again, when you think about not only psychotherapy, but when I studied um, the nervous system, all the things I was taught were wrong. We had atlases where we took apart the brain and we said these particular parts of the brain are what are associated with certain kinds of behavior, but that's not true. The brain is far more complex than that. It requires many different portions of the brain to function together to come to some conclusion as to what the person is doing and thinking.
Yeah.
We've been wrong about so much of our theory.
Yeah, but that's evolution, isn't it? Like you learn, unlearn, reassess, explore. But if you don't come at it with curiosity and you only come at it with, I'm going to prove myself and my theory right, you can't go anywhere. You have to be able to sit in that unknown.
Absolutely true. Absolutely. And postmodern thinking again requires us to deconstruct where an idea originated and why did it take that course. So you take something like delirium. Are you familiar with Michel Foucault?
No, explain. No.
Michel Foucault is a philosopher in France who was one of the original thinkers of postmodern philosophy. And he took the term delirium and went back to its origins. Well, the origins of delirium are at the time of Jesus in Palestine. The Roman Empire required farmers all throughout the empire to farm in rows. It was scientific farming. It was quite a discovery. But the Jews at the time, being very ornery, decided that God didn't tell them to plant that way, and they refused to plant in rows. So they were considered to be deliria, not functioning within the lines. And they were, at the time, 10,000 farmers were executed, were
Right.
crucified for not
Right.
farming in the lines. Well,
Lines.
deliria is the beginning of what we call delirious. That's
Yeah.
when you don't function in the lines of the community.
Yeah.
Its origins were you were punished for not doing what the established order wanted you to do.
Yeah. You weren't under control.
Right.
Yes.
Absolutely. Another example he gives is the derivation of the word hospital. So the original hospital was in Paris in 1640, and it was the Hôpital Général. And what it actually was a hospitality center for those people who were vagrants in the street. They were carted into this center that was the Hôpital. And now, over the next 100 years, they found out that many of those people were mentally ill, were sick, because they were poor and in the street. And then gathered together, they didn't function properly. And so the Hôpital became what we know as the hospital. Now, in the United States today, the largest mental hospital is the Cook County Jail.
Mm.
That's where all these people who have drug problems, alcohol problems, who once were in mental hospitals that they have since closed since the 1970s, are now brought. So in the future, when we talk about a hospital, it probably be what we know now as a jail.
Because they're not in the lines.
It's not in the lines. It has been brought out over time. It takes a shape that we think is familiar, but if we look at it, we see where it began isn't where we thought it began or where we think it's going.
Yeah. Actually, when I was writing, I used to go back sometimes and look at the origin of a word to
Yeah,
really, yeah. And you always learnt something. You were like, oh, okay. And
yeah, that's
yeah, well, and it's interesting because even like the jail systems, no one's asking how did they get here. You know what I mean? Like there's a whole history now of how people have been. I talk a lot about indifference, and when we become indifferent to the reality of something, then it will manifest into lots of different ways that cause more harm.
absolutely. And
Yeah.
and that's why it's so important to be vigilant.
Yeah. What's your sum up of the root of evil? Is it just, like to me it is indifference, but that's because I keep running it through this filter that I've got that I like to explore. Like because I think that whenever we are indifferent to the reality, whatever the reality is, or whatever facts we are aware of, sometimes you don't know all the facts, but whatever facts we are aware of, and if that keeps manifesting into more harm, isn't that the end result becomes sort of evil?
Yes, absolutely. So this is the point. These four factors that we found in psychotherapy, when I looked at them and I put it to a test to all the places in the history of our society that either led to a failure of the society or to ultimately evil, these were the four factors: power over behavior,
Mhm.
binary thinking, us versus them, simplistic solutions to complex problems, and the control of information.
Yeah.
When a person isn't given all the information, or we don't have all the information and we act as if we do, it leads to evil.
Yeah.
It's a construct that these four places converge. And if you look over time, you'll see that that's true in the Spanish Inquisition. That's true in Hitler's Nazi Germany. That's true in the Vietnam War. That's true in the Iraq War. And what scared me today, and the reason why I felt so pressured to get this out, is what's happening all through the world with these ultra right wing conservative um, powers trying to take control of our society. All those factors are at play, and I wanted to get this book out, and I wanted people to see this is what we have to be vigilant to.
Yeah, because if you are coming from one set of rules that is indifferent to other people, whether it's racism or fanaticism or anything like that, then then they're going to make the rules, the lines, that everyone has got to then be within. But we're not all born within those particular lines. So if we don't have an acceptance of diversity, all of a sudden we have a dictatorship.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. The world is constructed of complex truths and complex societies, and that's beautiful. And we need to protect that, not try to get one group to have power and control over all the other groups. We're watching that in my country right now. I don't know what's happening particularly in Australia, but it's happening throughout Europe that oligarchs, that right wing fascist principles are gaining control because the number of right wing people who want to maintain their power and are afraid of the alternative cultures coming to play in their homes and society. That is scaring so many people, and we need to listen to their fear. We need to respond in a way that makes them think we're not trying to cause them harm, but that the way they're thinking is dangerous, and it has led to fanatical behavior in the past. In the Spanish Inquisition, Galileo was tried for having non-Christian beliefs. And what were his non-Christian beliefs? His non-Christian beliefs were that the sun was the center of the universe. He found evidence that Copernicus had been correct and that the earth was not the center of the universe. Now, the Catholic Church at the time of Galileo knew he was right. They were most of the scientists and educated people of that era, but they couldn't believe that the masses would tolerate that the church had been wrong. So they didn't tell the truth.
Yeah, they still do that.
They still do that.
Yeah, they
Yes.
do. They still do that. So we really, as far as trying to hold control over each other, we really haven't evolved that much, have we?
No, in fact, these things continuously happen. They happened to the Jewish farmers. They happened to Galileo. They happened throughout this. During the Spanish Inquisition, 100,000 women and children were put to death, and their crime was lust, envy, and being sexual.
Yeah.
That's craziness.
Well, it is, and it's interesting because I how many of those women were set up for that to get rid of them? You know what I mean? So this complete control.
How dare they? How dare they have lust? How dare they want to have the same things men have?
Yeah, and even if they weren't, it was just a label that they could throw at them. It's like witch. Okay, throw that label at them. Okay, go and hang that one. She's sorted. So yeah, we've got a very strange history when you really look at us as humans of what we're prepared to do to each other.
Absolutely, and we're terrified of difference. We're terrified that the truths that we hold are not necessarily accurate. One of my favorite people of all time is Albert Einstein, and he got it.
Yeah,
he understood that the world was far more complex and that things were not what they appeared to be. He said, you look at a stone, for example, and it looks like it's not moving. But in actuality, it's just cells moving very slowly. And when we put it before, these new technological advances, we can see that. We can see that the things we believed by what we saw were inaccurate. He said geometry is only a correct mathematical phenomena if it's on one plane. But once you go into the multiplane of the universe, the rules like the Pythagoras theory do no longer hold up. They just fall apart. So we live in a complex world where we have to keep learning and investigating, and things that we've held to be sacrosanct aren't that at all.
Yeah. Well, I always think if something's a truth and you can pull it apart and you still come back to that truth that resonates with you, it's resonating with you now because that's as much information as you have. But when you move forward, if you get more information, you've got to reassess what you class as that truth to see if you have expanded your own awareness so you can pull more information in. And then what resonates with you there is a truth that you understand now. But it's always a moving thing. Otherwise, you're not evolving. You're not expanding your awareness.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. So
we live in a world that's constantly expanding and changing, and we have to keep reevaluating what is real and what is not. I was shocked when I learned that when they shot astronauts up into space, if they took a brother or a twin, the hair growth on the part of the astronaut in space was slower than their brother on the ground. That's a crazy idea.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, how could that be? He's the same amount of time, but no. everything is based upon time and speed and space. And these are things we never understood before.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're still trying to understand them, isn't it?
Yes, we're
And
still trying to understand, and we'll come up with better explanations long after we're gone.
yeah, that's true too. So, why are people so oppositional to the truth of anything?
Again, when things are new and not understood well, they become threatening to us. We have to be careful to listen, to evaluate, to understand, to deconstruct the ideas so that we understand how this new idea might have importance to us. We're threatened. We're very fragile beings, and we become threatened.
Yeah. And we can do that on minor things as well, isn't it? Like personally, the amount of effort that we will put into controlling our own, there can be misconceptions about ourselves and belief systems, that, our inner belief systems. I find that we first start off with that oppositional energy to actually even exploring our own emotions.
Yeah, I remember asking a graduate class of mine, which is the most prosperous nation on earth? And they said, well, of course, it's the United States. I said, and you base that on what? Oh, we're the best standard of living. We have more going for us than any other nation. That's why everybody looks up to us. I said, that isn't necessarily true. And the fact is, places like the Netherlands or Norway have much higher standard of living than we do. That can't be. That just can't be. I said, well, you might check it out. You might go and see what the what goes on in other countries. Americans, many of them are so frightened of the idea of uh, something being socialist. And then when you tell them, well, Social Security is socialism. No, it's not. It can't be. So people hold on to certain beliefs, even though you give them evidence that their thought is wrong. I asked another class of mine, how do you understand evolution? And they said, what do you mean? And several of the students in my class said, well, evolution is just a theory. It's wrong because God created the world in 7 days. And I said, how many of you believe that? And about a third of the class raised their hand and said, yeah, that's what happened. I said, well, where in those 7 days were the dinosaurs? And they said, there were no dinosaurs. And I said, really? What are the bones that we see in the Museum of Natural History? They were put here by the devil to fool us.
Right.
Now, these are graduate students in Massachusetts,
Yeah.
USA. And a third of them believe that because that's what they were told and that's what they hold on to, even though there's massive evidence that that's not true.
It's fascinating. I wrote about it in one of my books, but it's not published yet. That I remember cousins and I and my brother, we're all sitting around, one night just talking about nothing really. And we got talking about our old pets, your favorite dog. And then I told this story how our dog got stolen out of the backyard because it was so beautiful and it was taken to a dog show because this person, thought this dog was so beautiful and we never seen the dog again. And my brother burst out into laughter and said, do you really believe that? And I was like, yes. And then he said what actually happened to the dog. And I was like, so when I was 4 or 3, that was the story I was told, obviously, so I wouldn't get upset or whatever reason they
Yes.
thought. And I could feel myself going into absolute shock that this dog was not pinched to go to a dog show. And when you think about that story, it's pretty ridiculous. Normally they're sent to a farm when they disappear. But anyway, my my mum was creative. So
Yes, she was.
she was. So, and I was just thought, oh, this is the shock that you feel when something that you feel in control of, that belief,
Yes.
is now
And that
broken.
we've held on to it sacredly. And
Yes.
so for that belief to be challenged is so difficult
Yeah.
to come to understand.
Yeah, that's right. And that, we all laughed about this particular one because it's not really that important. I mean, the dog is important to it. Our dog, that dog is the legend in our family, but it's like you can come to peace with the reality of that very quickly. But when it's something that you find your belief and your control has been blown over and you struggle to come to peace with that, then it's in a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So, and that's when you do have, kids going and throwing rocks at windows because what they believed should be, go home, mum will be excited to see me. Go home and mum's passed out on the floor. I'm freaking out. I'm scared. I taking that now that she doesn't care. She's not, she's not interested in me. I'm not important. You get angry and you go and lash it out.
Yes.
And we don't understand sometimes when we see behaviours, and I'm not condoning those kind of behaviours, but if you take a minute to try and work out what is that person acting out, then you can actually start exploring the complexity of humans and
Yes.
our emotions.
Okay, so you are a full-fledged postmodernist.
Right. I feel like I've just graduated.
Yes, I feel like I wish you were on our team.
There you go. Well, I've been exploring human nature and emotions, and I do it from an understanding of energy. So when I feel stuff, so I feel that oppositional energy sometimes. So, you might have an achievement and you're excited and you're telling someone, and they might be going, "Oh, that's great." And then you feel this undercurrent, and now it might be their insecurities, it might be their jealousy, it might be their fear of when, if people are comparing themselves to you, that you're moving and they're stuck. And there's such a complex event that can happen over one or two statements that when you feel it all, you have to work out what it is you're feeling, or are you feeling your own reaction? Like you might be the same scenario. You might be disappointed that that person isn't excited for you, or you might feel like, go into your belief systems of, oh, no one ever celebrates for me, or, self-pity and woe is me and the victim mentality. So in one moment, there can be lots of things happening. And I like to explore that. I've spent 30 years exploring how does this all work.
Again, I am a firm believer in curiosity. Curiosity is what should guide us all. It's inbred in our genes.
I
If we
agree.
didn't have curiosity, we wouldn't advance.
Exactly.
So two things that I think are the antidote to evil are curiosity and love. And both of those are instinctually within us. But as you're talking, curiosity is so important to be able to say, I'm sensing something from you. I'm curious if you can explain to me what it is that you're thinking or feeling. That is so much better than assuming we know
Yes.
what they're thinking and feeling.
Yeah.
So being curious is the first grounds for um, mental health, for the well-being of the world, and to counteract evil.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you the big question that we ask all our guests. What does humanity need to acknowledge and understand for us to evolve?
Oh, that's a big question. So I'm going to say it again. I think humanity needs to buy into curiosity, and it needs to buy into compassion and love and respect for others.
Mm.
If we don't listen carefully to what's guiding other people that seem at odds with us, if we don't show them respect and a willingness to hear their point of view, we will always be at odds and find ourselves in conflict. So the way for humanity to go forward is to dialogue and listen. When one of the things I've done over the past decade is I was part of a project called ArtsBridge, and we went, a group of us, from to Israel and Palestine,
Okay.
and we brought Palestinian and Israeli children together to learn about each other, and they would come with such um, horrible, angry stories about the other, and believe that they were the victims of the other. But when they started to come together and dialogue and listen, they would start to realize they're just like me. We have beliefs that are rooted in stories that really don't resemble these people we're meeting
Mm.
at this point.
I think that's very easy for us to look at something as a collective of those people over there. Then we disconnect from the human soul part of those people over there.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Um, and so we have beliefs that we maintain that keep us separate. You
Yes.
know, again, on my trip to Israel, my last trip, the Israeli government was in the process of taking down Bedouin communities. Bedouins had been promised at the creation of Israel that they would be able to live the way they've lived throughout history, with their camels and their goats, and move about um, with much like Aboriginal people in Australia or Native Americans, and live under the stars. And they decided that this was no longer feasible, as Israel was now such a advanced technological state. They wanted them to go and move into um, housing.
Mm.
So I went to a rally uh, in the town of Lod, which is the armpit of Israel, and where the Bedouin community was about to have their tents mowed down. And I walked into the community, and a previous student of mine, who was a counselor now in Israel, screamed out, "It's Dr. Evan. It's Dr. Evan. You've come here. You really mean what you say. You're supporting us." And he, in Arabic, shouted out to the Bedouin community, "This is Dr. Evan. He's come from America to help us." And I got hugged and swarmed by all these people who were uh, in this terrible town of Lod. So I was on a plane going home to the United States 2 days later. And I was sitting next to an Israeli businessman who asked me, "Why do I go to Israel?" I said, "I go there to try to create commonality between people." He said, "Oh, impossible." I said, "Well, did you see the other night on the news the rally in Lod for the Bedouins?" He said, "Oh, yeah. What a horrible place that is." I said, "No, they're really wonderful people. I was there." He said, "Oh, you're crazy. You went to Lod?" I said, "Yeah." And I found the people were so happy to see me. So he said, "Well, I live 15 miles away in Tel Aviv, and I would never go to Lod." I said, "Well, then, do you ever go to the wall?" He said, "We're not allowed to." I said, "What do you mean you're not allowed to?" He said, "We can't go into the West Bank." I said, "Well, you might go one of these days up to one of the places of entry into the West Bank and watch what happens there." He said, "Oh, no, 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 I don't want to see that." And
Mm.
at 35,000 feet up in the air, I realized this is how evil happens. People turn their back on looking at the factors that are happening around them. They don't think they're being mean or bad or evil. They don't want to see.
Yeah.
And it's our job, your job, Lorraine. You're doing it here in a very special way on your podcast, to let people see and hear other ideas and learn.
And that's the importance of the listener as well, because
Absolutely.
they're coming and being curious about it. And it
Right.
is so easy to fall into that, not looking up from your own world. Curiosity helps you look, but truthfulness lets you see. And you need
Yes.
the two together. Otherwise, your curiosity is not going anywhere.
Right. And so, the old expression, curiosity killed the cat. Um, we've been warned from the time of Adam and Eve not to be curious, not
Yeah,
to bite into the apple.
yeah, that is
Which, by
true.
the way, is an interesting story because Eve was not the first wife of Adam, and people go, "What? You're crazy! It's in the
I just
Bible."
did it. I went, what?
Well, I said, "Did you ever hear of Lilith?"
Yeah.
And their answer is no. And I say, "Well, you should look it up." Lilith stood up to Adam and was banished from the garden, and Adam went to God and said, "What am I going to do now?" And then we know the rest of the story. We got a rib taken out of and created women, but we don't want to know the whole story. Don't tell me that's the story. Why don't I know that story if it's true? I said,
Yeah.
I don't know if the story is true, but it's a really interesting story, don't you think?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's like, never get locked in that you know everything. Never,
Yes.
yes, like you're always in a learning curve and there's no destination. Even, I talk about evolution and soul awakening and things like that. There's no destination that you're going to get to. It's just you actually know that that's what you're experiencing is that, and you can only do that if you're being curious and truthful with yourself.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm hoping the people who are listening to this podcast will go out and buy my book and read some more of these examples of
Yeah.
how we've been shortchanged the whole story.
So what story did you find in your research that you just went, well, I never? What one stayed with you?
Well, again, when you look at the history of how Christianity got formed, and you look at uh, the Council of Nicaea in the year 400, and you learn, and again, something totally most of us are unaware of, that at that council they banished 80 gospels to Jesus. They burnt them, they
Right.
destroyed them, and they only allowed for 4 gospels to be the true gospels to Jesus. Well, the 4 gospels were written by men 400 years or 100 years after Jesus. The ones that were burned were gospels of people like Thomas,
That was
and
there.
who was there, Mary Magdalene. They all had given their testimony to what happened, and they challenged the ideas of what the Council of Nicaea thought should be the forming of Christianity. So it was formed on falsehood. It was formed on their creating a myth that would work for them to have power.
Yeah. They could create the lines.
They could create the lines, they could create how things would come down, who would be in power. And the rest of us, thousands of years later, still don't know what really happened.
Yeah, that's true. Yes. And we've got these belief systems running through our head that are so ingrained based on
Yeah,
information that someone
right.
wants.
And
Yeah.
you're accused of being sacrilegious or being um, blasphemous. And the truth is, you're just being creative and interested and trying to learn more and trying to see the complexity of the human experience.
Which is what, from this is just my opinion, is what Jesus was doing. He was looking at
Oh,
things and going, hang on, how's this work? Hang
right.
on.
Jesus was a great man. I don't want to take away from
No,
uh,
no.
who he was or his philosophy of life. We just don't practice it.
Yeah. And we're not 100% sure of what it is because we don't have all the information.
Right.
But we can take the essence of it and go, okay, be like him, curious, truthful, caring, and then keep it simple. Keep that part simple while we work out the complexities of everything else.
Right.
Well,
You're going to have to let me know about your books because I have to read them.
okie dokie, I will. Well, we're going to play Flip the Book now. So, would you like to pick? So, this is an intuitive exercise. So, could you pick 1, 2, or 3? So, there's 3 books. Would you like book 1, book 2, book 3?
Book 2.
Book 2. Okay, so that is called Spirituality, Evolution, and Awakened Consciousness. And you have,
Wow.
yes, just some little titles there. So
Yeah.
you've got 1 to 188 pages to pick from.
Okay. Well, since I picked the second one, why don't we try to pick the middle, about page 100?
About page 100, right? So, okay, this is a story. 12 lines to pick from, paragraphs.
Well, let's pick line 5.
Okay, so this actually comes off a story. And just to give you the essence of the story, there's a couple and they're marriage counselors, and one of their friends comes to visit and realizes that they're preaching and working with a lot of people, but they're not really living it. But their control structures are so strong that they just keep, having this sort of treadmill sort of response to everything, and they're, imparting these wisdoms, but they're not really of it. That would be the guts of it. So Jeffrey, that's one of the counselors, began to lecture Jackson on the virtues of inner work. It bizarrely turned into a 45-minute polite rant while Dahlia continually nodded her head. That's his partner. Jackson laughed. What are you guys doing? You are saying a lot, but it sounds like you are reciting one of your brochures. What does that make you think and feel?
Well, again, I think we have inner dialogues that we govern ourselves by, and often those dialogues aren't challenged.
Yeah.
We just keep trying to reinforce these beliefs, even though they aren't working for us.
Yeah.
And we need to be able to be open to somebody questioning them, challenging them, asking questions about the derivation of those ideas, and do they work?
Yes.
Are
Yeah.
they being employed?
Yeah. And I think too is that if you're on the other end and you're asking the questions, be respectful that it is somebody's belief system that you're looking at. And there's a difference between challenging and attacking and judging.
Yes.
So when you're challenging it, it's a conversation and you're asking questions and you're trying to understand the reason why someone believes that. And when you're judging, you're running it through your filters of what they should be thinking, and you're trying to control them to come back to that thought process. So in that story is that counselor has this idea of how everything should work, which is really just a control structure, trying to build the lines, and his mate Jackson is in there going, hang on, you're saying these, you're not really of it, you're not living the true essence of it. And we can get caught up on that. If it's like you see now on Facebook pictures of people taking photos of themselves being generous so that they can put it on Instagram or Facebook. Is that the true essence of generosity, that you're doing it for this purpose? So that should be challenged, and then you come back.
So, Lorraine, are you a therapist?
No, I'm a soul intuitive. So I've worked with, so what I do is I come in and read people's energy from so I'm reading the energy that I can feel off people. But I've worked with people for over, I was going to say over 25 years. I'm getting close to calling it 30. So people would employ me to go in and look at their energy and find out what the blockages are. So, I did different modalities and all the rest of it. But it's just this natural skill that I have. And then what I did was I documented it and the themes that I could find on people. And then I would explore those themes, like why are we so oppositional to the truth? And then I would just run workshops and present this information and then study how people responded to it and what they had problems with. So that's where my learning came from. So from a
Well,
very different angle.
Lorraine, I feel cheated because we're not going to have time to keep doing this. I, I have really enjoyed meeting you.
Yeah, and thank you. And thank you for being part of the podcast.
Thank you for inviting me. And I hope that at some point we'll have an opportunity to do more dialoguing together.
Me too. Thank you.